Welcome to SOapbox, the official podcast from Spencer Ogden. In this series, titled Voices of the Energy Transition, we explore the major forces reshaping the global energy industry. Each quarter, we'll tackle one key theme across talent, ESG, financing, and innovation. Hosted by our team members in Australia, New York, London, Malaysia, and beyond, SOapbox delivers regional insights and expert perspectives to help you stay ahead in the energy transition.
I'm joined today with Lindsay Reichert, the Senior HR Business Partner at Cypress Creek Renewables. Lindsay joined Cypress Creek almost 9 years ago and comes with an expansive 11 years experience in HR and recruiting. In today's episode, we will discuss attracting and retaining mid-career talent and why in our ever-changing renewable energy market it can still remain difficult to source and engage with a 3 to 5 year level of experience in the market. This is the SOapbox series. My name is Ella Cann, today's host of our global series. I'm the manager of our renewable energy and power division at Spencer Ogden. Denver-based, I moved to the US 4 years ago. During a 10-year career in recruitment, I have worked in markets across construction, mining, and energy, and also have been actively involved in nonprofit organizations such as RISE and Women in Mining. For the last 4 years, I've worked directly in the US renewables market, supporting IPPs and developers build out their teams, which is what led me to meet Lindsay. Lindsay, welcome and thank you for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
Can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about you?
Yeah, so as Ella stated, I'm the Senior HR Business Partner here at Cypress. I originally fell into HR through recruiting, through my university. And so I've worked through a few different industries there, whether that is health and fitness, banking, hospitality, and then, almost 9 years ago now, fell into renewables and really have enjoyed the space. I enjoy being that really core HR partner. And obviously now my role has really grown to expand from recruiting to all other areas of HR, but then I still manage talent acquisition at Cypress.
Tell us a little bit more about what inspired your HR career at the start and what led you to joining Cypress nearly 9 years ago, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is the 8th year. So I'm well into my 8th year now, heading into almost the 9th there. So it's exciting. Definitely for me, I knew I was a person that had to work with people, right? So falling into recruiting was pretty natural initial first step. But then I very quickly got anxious to look into these other areas as it reflected in recruiting, right? If all the other HR operations are not working properly, that's going to put a lot more strain on that recruiting team to constantly have to recruit for, whatever that looks like, turnover, for example, there. That's a big thing. So that's where I realized I wanted to do so much more than just recruit and really help with the whole operation. Because at the end of the day, no matter what the company is, the most important component is the people. So I've always really enjoyed that kind of support role there. I came into renewables after being laid off at a bank and was looking through different options. I knew industries that I did not want to go back to, and I knew industries that I did not want to get into. So I found renewables, honestly, through LinkedIn. And I was brought into Cypress when we were very much a startup. It was also very much so my first startup experience as well. And I have really enjoyed it ever since. And now I really squarely say that I don't know if I can work in any other industry.
Love that. You mentioned obviously starting your career in recruiting and then transitioning into the HR side. What did that take for you to make that transition? And what, I know you said you decided to, but was that then going to school and studying that, or did you already had that under your belt by that point?
I definitely already had that under my belt at that point. I made really great connections very early on in my career on the HR side. Those individuals taught me so much and really gave me some good perspective there. I took the option to do a working notice versus being laid off right away. And then I spent pretty much all that working notice period, nearly 6 months, really more focusing on HR. And then that all really was cemented by me taking my HR certificate course and taking that SHRM course to really solidify the knowledge that I had built on all the other areas of the employee life cycle.
Great. And that's why I'm excited to speak to you about this topic, because I think it's going to be really insightful from your side of having both that recruiting side. I think before we get into questions, how much of your role is split between both right now? Like, what does a typical day or week look like in your role?
It's definitely 50-50 at this point, like half recruiting, half HR. And that's improving from what I initially felt like I was doing, which was more like 70-80% recruiting and the remainder being HR. So it's been really exciting that I've gotten to expand my team so I can really kind of broach into the other areas and drive some more strategic initiatives for the company there.
Okay, so my first question is, tell us a little bit more about your experience with these candidates in the 3 to 5 year bracket, and how is the candidate experience different for that group of potential candidates versus maybe hiring somebody more junior or somebody more senior into the business?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is you're dealing with individuals who are experienced at interviewing. So you really do have to focus on a few different things. That's meaningful work, right? Making sure that you're putting together that polished job description and purpose that that individual is going to be driving. Branding also really needs to resonate with that individual, and they need to be bought into the bigger picture of what the organization is doing there. Because you have individuals that are experienced interviewing, but also experienced in the workplace, their like motivations are different. They want flexibility, they want visibility, they want growth in that organization. I think that's just really important when you're looking at recruiting.
Yeah, it's such an interesting transition too, because we've spoken before about the internship programs that you guys run, and obviously we've partnered together on hiring either 3 to 5s or the more senior experience too, and it's that element of both. The more senior candidates maybe have longer longevity when they're coming into the business. So maybe some can even be less experienced at interviewing in a more senior position than a 3 to 5 year candidate too. And like you said, that like culture, the branding, all that stuff falls into that. What do you think are the top 3 factors that a mid-career candidate prioritizes when they're evaluating a job opportunity? And how do you think that would influence their overall decision? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think what I see is like number 1 is usually growth potential. Like how are they going to grow in this position? Secondly, I would say, and with that like growth potential, it's on the interview team to ensure that you are really selling that career trajectory authentically.
Yeah,
that's something that's really important. Being authentic, being transparent there. I think also at this point, when you're looking at like at least 3 years experience, you have individuals that are now looking into more leadership positions, right? Transitioning from that individual contributor to that leader, to that manager. And so they're also evaluating like what are the resources that they're going to get from that company in order to really help them with that transition. And then I think the last one is really that kind of like visibility and growth. Something that I thought was really interesting doing some research for this exact topic is how individuals that are in the midpoint of their career need both mentorship and sponsorship. Yes. So, mentors really help to sharpen your tools. You probably have gathered those mentors as an individual contributor, but then to be really effective taking that next step up, you also, maybe that's the same person, maybe it's somebody different, but you also need that kind of sponsor in that sense too. That's that person that's going to put you in the room where you get to use those skills. Those are the individuals that advocate on your behalf. They promote you, they recommend you for opportunity.
100%. I was just thinking about my own experience too when you were saying that sponsor can even sometimes be somebody outside of the business, at least to start with, and then you can gravitate towards somebody when you start. Something I really like that Cypress do when onboarding people, especially relocation candidates, is you'll put them in touch with people who are in the same office, building those relationships before people are already starting so that they can start to build those mentorships and sponsorship relationships before they even start.
Yeah. And I think you'll find those major career candidates are more keen to actually like reach out to individuals they're interviewing and network appropriately there too. So, they want to hear information that they're being bought into something that is authentic and is going to support their growth as well.
Okay. So in terms of approaching interviews for this group, this is maybe more so even from your side when onboarding people in this career bracket. Do you focus more on project experience, on leadership potential? Is it something else? Could it be a collaboration of the two?
Yeah. So I'll answer this. And I was surveying a few different individuals in my organization to prepare for this podcast. So kind of like putting my thoughts together and what I heard from my hiring managers, from my leaders as well. It's a matter of totally a mixture of both. I think when you have the experience, you're not going to be digging so much more into the experience in your whole interview process. There needs to be a balance of that experience and that kind of like cultural fit.
Yeah.
Right. Something that my recruiter and I were talking about. Again, with that experience, you should understand how to keep a conversation flowing and keep it going there too. And that's just some of the, the non-technical items that you're looking for there as well that really matter with like the cultural fit, making sure that they can, dive into our environment, in which you have to be, extremely adaptable. You also have very extreme ownership over what you're doing and also joining an environment that is very much in a hybrid state as an organization. We're not that startup anymore, but we're also not that massive organization. So there's a constant need for that kind of continuous improvement. And I think number one fault that people will go into is like if you see a problem and you don't try to like point it out, or at least point it out, but then also contribute to like fixing the solution.
Yeah.
If you're just going to ignore that problem, that's also something that we kind of look at, and we want to ask those behavioral questions to really understand if that individual can be really solutions oriented. They have to have that growth mindset. They have to be willing to like push themselves forward there. So and obviously for some other roles, the technical component will weigh a lot.
Yeah, that's so interesting. What I'm hearing you say is we can assess for the potential for the future, but given what you're hiring for right now, these people need to be able in this group to roll their sleeves up, to want to get involved, to want to have a voice, which is a great opportunity for the right person who wants to be ambitious and entrepreneurial. And
I look at it as like it's a pie of a candidate profile. And as you get more experience, it's a lot easier to understand, okay, what are the hard skills? What are the technical skills? And really purpose of that interview process is to fill in the rest of the pie. Can they lead effectively? Can they manage up? Can they manage down? Can they communicate and harness the right level of collaboration in these groups? Because it's all one big work project at the end of the day.
Okay, I touched on this before, but I wanted to ask on the visa sponsorship piece. So it's an important consideration when we're looking at mid-career professionals. Obviously, if they're looking to relocate or join a global organization or even a national organization, right? How does your company and how does Cyprus support candidates who might require visa sponsorship?
Yeah, no, I mean, we're proud to support sponsorship opportunities and really open ourselves up to that international talent, to that diverse perspective and voice that can come into the organization. You do have to be employed for a minimum amount of time, but we're constantly having those conversations. And now fast forward, almost 9 years later, we have a very robust visa sponsorship program, which I think is so exciting that we're able to support that global, that diverse talent coming into the organization.
Can you share a little bit more about how that works, what the process looks like?
Yeah, so we kick off the conversation in recruiting to better understand your needs there, encourage candidates to be transparent and to do their research ahead of time to understand what they are exactly going to ask for of the organization. I think that's really important there. So whether it's an H-1B transfer, we're able to accommodate, let's say it's a STEM OPT, we're able to accommodate those immediately. And then further sponsorships like H-1B or green card, you do have to be employed for that minimum time period before we go into that process. We have a law firm that we partner very closely with on those initiatives that helps us manage our visa program and ensure that everybody's in compliance with what they need there.
Yeah. And like I said before, the onboarding process of anybody relocating, sometimes even on a visa sponsorship program, obviously there's extra layers and extra questions in that too. But I do think that Cyprus do a great job of accommodating anybody who's relocating to different offices, especially now there is a big push on hubbing out locations.
We're rebalancing for sure. We are rebalancing from COVID, yes. And the biggest flexibility we're going to give there is, I would say majority of the time, we're not requiring individuals to relocate by the start date.
Yes.
If that's what they want to do, amazing. If not, we're going to be able to establish, clear expectations there on when they're going to relocate, whether that's a month from now or even up to a year from now. But obviously the business needs are taken into account when it comes to agreeing to those terms as well.
Great.
And we have more office locations than ever as well. So
Yeah,
even more flexibility for individuals to go into different areas now that we have our established offices in New York as well as here in Chicago. And we just finished building out more space in our DC office too. And then obviously have our established office locations in the Carolinas, in Durham, and in Asheville, as well as in California and LA, where I'm originally based, as well as San Francisco.
Yes. We spoke before about candidates having in the 3 to 5 year bracket a lot of previous interview experience to a degree. How can the hiring teams keep their processes engaged and fresh for these candidates? And what makes an interview stand out positively?
Yeah, I think how we can stay effective is like that. It's always a balance of like, you don't want too many stages, you don't want too little stages.
Yes.
So I think I've seen like the whole kind of trajectory here at Cyprus where like the startup time, the early years was just go, go, go to the point where sometimes it was just even here's the resume, send out the offer letter. And that, I didn't have any visibility into even if there was an interview process. And then we've had hiring teams where, they also will ask for what I look at excessive interviews. And what I find, and this relates very much to like my collaboration style, my leadership style, is I'm not going to force how I want things done on a hiring manager in that case. What I find is they will learn the lesson themselves because they will lose candidates or candidates will be transparent. And I think people are more transparent than ever to give feedback back to employers around feeling like interview processes are too long, too repetitive. And again, when you're looking at that pie, you also want to make sure that anyone that you're including in that interview panel or process understands exactly like their role in what they're interviewing for. Because it all can't just be, tell me about yourself, tell me about your resume.
Right, and a repeated conversation from the candidate side. And that circles back to keeping it fresh, keeping people engaged. So how can a candidate get a diverse experience in their interview process as well as obviously ticking the boxes that the candidate needs to meet the right amount of people for you to assess their ability to come into the company? That circles back to everything you just said.
From a candidate experience, like how candidates can come off positively to the hiring team, sourcing and surveying individuals both in my company and outside of my company too, talking about this topic. The number one thing I heard was clarity. So it's like, I don't know how many times I've taught this to my interns even, and it's funny, I'm like, I only teach it to my interns, but maybe I should teach it to other people too, is like understanding the STAR response, situation, task, action, result. Like it's very basic, but it is so helpful when it comes to answering those questions that come your way. Because again, when you're in this like kind of more experienced territory, you're not just doing yes or no questions. You're doing more behavioral questions. Tell me about a time when, where we want to hear a little bit more about, tell me exactly how you went through the situation, what was the action that you took, and what was that end result. And I think another one is, again, just making sure that you can keep that conversation flowing, keep it going, and it's not awkward silences, and you're able to fill in that space as well with intentional questions too.
Yeah, from the candidate side. I have seen a lot of that too. And I think from my side of that, and even speaking to people in this bracket, a recruiting standpoint, they want to be challenged in the interview process too. Nobody wants to have this is who I am, this is my background 10 times, and then they get a job at the end. There is a level of that group that are at the mid to the start of really big part of their career that wants to come into an interview and say, I've spent 3, 5, 6 years doing this now. Let me show off a little bit.
Balance between being challenged and also being surprised in the interview process. So that can lead to more of a negative view versus, again, there's a difference between being challenging and asking thought-provoking questions versus like catching somebody off guard because we didn't set the right expectations of what this conversation was going to be.
So company culture plays a huge role in a candidate's decision to accept an offer. We all know that. How do we ensure that mid-career candidates get an authentic sense of your company's culture?
Yeah, it's definitely something where, again, I look at those common frustrations for this level of experience. being, they're looking for meaningful work, they're looking for that flexibility, looking for that visibility, looking for that growth, also looking at that branding and that branding really resonating with them. And that's where I enjoy my past experience being with companies that had such strong brands and marketing. And it also just really hits on my love of that itself. My minor was marketing in college too. So, understanding how these brands really like build a whole business and a foundation is really important. So how do we make sure that that comes across authentically? I mean, for me, I think a big part of our process is the fact that the interview process, the tone is set by my team, by HR, so we can set a very clear message there in terms of, what is it that we're looking for? What is the environment? And I mean, maybe candidates can attest, especially when you're talking to myself and I'm the interviewer, coming in with all the years of experience and seeing the environment here. I try to be as, again, transparent as possible, in letting them know what are the opportunities, but also what are the areas for opportunity as well. How we make sure we reinforce that with the rest of the company, because it's obviously not just us interviewing too, is we're constantly doing that kind of like interview training, making sure they're aware of the candidate experience, making sure that we're actually doing that intake call where we're talking about the process, we're talking about the skills that are required. So we understand what all those areas are before we actually go into the interview process too. And that's something that is really important, preparing basically at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's all about the preparation for that, especially when I think when people move through interview process, they make an assumption that it's your hiring manager, your panel, your in-person. There is so much more that comes in before that. Even when me and you partner together, there's the intake call, like you said before then, whether that's with an agency, whether that's you doing the intake call with the hiring manager. And I think it's just as important for your company and anybody's company branding that that's done right. And then add that extra layer of your conversation on top of that, because even if you go back a layer underneath that, you're engaging with candidates that aren't necessarily right for the position that you're looking at, but they could be right for another position in the future. But you're engaging with people incorrectly if they're not engaged correctly. Right.
Yeah. And if also, again, like we don't have a clear understanding of where all the needs are, that's such an area where we've gotten so much more effective now that, again, there is a clear process that I can take a candidate from one process and let's say, maybe it's not going to work best there. Maybe they're going to work better in this other team. And I can seamlessly kind of transition them into another process and really like maximize what is a good candidate's possibility of joining our company.
Yeah, because a lot of the times when hiring managers see a candidate, they are so laser focused because they have a need in their team. And it's a real business need that means that their time is being spent covering whatever this potential candidate is going to be, that they can't necessarily always see the bigger picture.
100%.
And I like to, when you're involved in that, it's the culture piece, it's is this person going to be right for the business? Also, you've been here for such a long time that you've seen the business transition and you can speak to that too, and the growth, which I've always heard is very well received too.
Definitely. And I think like the biggest transition too with that is, again, just having like that very clear, like every individual's purpose is very clear versus when we would do that in the early days, they would come into a situation and just kind of be passed along before they are really able to like find their clear focus. So really being able to be more effective there has been really nice.
Okay, different question for hiring managers, if any hiring managers are listening to our podcast.
Yes.
What's one thing you would advise them to keep in mind to create an exceptional candidate experience?
One thing to keep in mind. That's a great question because I think there's a lot of things.
Yeah.
But number one thing to keep in mind is, really coming in with that clarity, with that purpose of what you're looking for. Again, making sure that you what you're explaining to that individual is going to be something that resonates for them. Favorite questions that I ask in the intake call to the hiring managers are asking them their views of what will the right candidate love about this job, and also getting insight from them too at that point of how would they sell the opportunity, so that they have an opportunity to practice that a little bit and start to put some better framework around it. And it's not something they're thinking of on the spot as they're interviewing and then they're stumbling over their words. That preparation is something that's really important.
I'm going to steal that question.
Yeah.
What would the right candidate
love about this job? Yeah.
No, it's so true. And even being able to go to market and present Cypress Creek opportunities, that's something that's the first questions that candidates want to hear when they're being approached or even considering a role too. So great. Okay. As we wrap up, what advice would you give companies looking to retain their mid-career hires after a successful recruitment process?
Yeah, I would say prioritizing internal mobility and retention at the same time is really important. People want to move forward. So it's not just about retain people, but also we need to develop. And that's what's going to lead you to retain them more effectively, right? So, for example, from an HR perspective, you see performance management moving more towards more regular conversations versus just having one annual review. You want to have more of those conversations often in terms of having those kinds of growth conversations. And that's actually where we're headed as well, as we've established this performance management process, starting off with establishing traditional annual review, then evolving into our annual review, our mid-year check-in review, to now where we're headed next year is very similar. Instead of having one big review, you're going to have conversations all throughout the year on your growth, on how you're progressing there. And then what's also really important, which is where my work and scope is more focused, is having more transparent career ladders. I look at it as 4 P's of engagement for employee populations. There's people, there's pay, there's progress, there's purpose. And we've spent a lot of time on people and pay. I think people overall, we have a very good filter, and I enjoy everybody who I've got to work with in my time here at Cypress. Pay, making sure that we establish those pay bands a year or two ago now. And so then now that transitions into making sure that individuals understand their purpose and exactly how they progress, which is where those job matrices really help as a really effective tool in that too.
Where have you seen that done right and where have you seen that done wrong? From an examples perspective.
Even just relating to my experience here and when we were a startup and we weren't having those performance conversations, even just personally for myself, it was hard to understand what I was marching towards.
Yeah.
Because my role, especially in HR, is I need to be hyper tied to the business goals in order for me to be most effective. So without us having those goals, without us having kind of, not just personal goals for myself, but company goals, to now we have our corporate scorecard, we have a very clear understanding of where we're trying to move towards. That's really helpful. And then again, even the job matrices, if you're seeing that your employee population maybe has perceptions that they have uncompetitive pay, or you see multiple individuals kind of all doing the same thing, it's not very organized. Those are very clear signs that maybe your company needs clear leveling, needs clear understanding of what everybody's role and responsibilities are there. And that clarity will really help with kind of balancing the environment. I've definitely seen that here and how that's really helped in our environment, especially as transition from a very lean organization to something that more mid-size. Every single group has more support to better balance the workload that's coming through. That's something that's really important. So we can make sure we're not all falling over each other doing the same thing.
It's a hard thing to do right.
It's really difficult to do right. And I look at that work too as never ending. You can put out a job matrix, but you should be looking at it constantly. You should be evolving it. Listening to the feedback that your employees are telling you around how it's resonating with them too is really important.
Yeah, I think even from an onboarding perspective, bringing everybody in at the right level, especially when the market was a little bit different than it was now 2-3 years ago. I think there was a lot, I know there was a lot of
overinflation
and over-ambitious applications or conversations, or we need to get this person in, so we'll give them the title to get them through the door.
Oh my goodness, yes.
And I've seen a dramatic change in that, not just from a hiring perspective, but also from a candidate's perspective. You mentioned before about letting the hiring managers learn their own way.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a shift in the candidate side too, where they've almost learned too.
Mm-hmm.
I've had conversations, much more conversations recently about people more open in lateral moves than I have done ever before, of people thinking, okay, well, I'll come in and then this is where my promotion will be, rather than going for the manager or the director title, really thinking about that growth and longevity rather than the here and now.
Yeah, 100%. I think that matters because people are also going to be in this environment right now. They're less risk averse. But then also, again, like having those clear standards of like, what does each level mean, allow you to bring people in at the right level. Because those were, I mean, we've been in those situations before. I plenty of other HR professionals and my peers that have been in that situation where you bring somebody in who you, and when it's that situation, it ultimately is also unequitable, right? For everybody in that team.
Definitely.
And whether they say it or not, they see it. And so I feel very validated in that sense when I've seen those situations. I know what's going to happen there. And what I think is going to happen does happen in terms of individuals and peers being very frustrated.
Yeah.
You know, there's different standards for different teams and we're all doing the same thing. That's never going to be effective there.
Yeah, that ties so well into what the question was anyway about retaining staff. You can bring people in all day long. If you're not looking at the equity in the team, that's when your existing team is going to leave.
Exactly. Yeah. And equity for me is really important. And I really appreciate now that we can even have those conversations more effectively. We can slow down just a smidge. And I hate even using the word slow, but just a smidge to even have those conversations, talk about the existing team and how this individual is going to come in to balance it, or he's going to come in to provide more experience and reinforce an area that they don't currently have reflected in the team.
Yeah. And it's not even slowing down, it's almost quickening up, because if you don't do it right, then you're backfilling the positions of the people.
Yeah, I'm so service oriented sometimes that I'm like, it's okay, we can skip the intake call. You know, I'm going to go get what you need, because I do have a general understanding of what that is. But I always find that when I start a search that way too, it's like you're recruiting with a crutch, you know, like you're not full on recruiting because you yourself are not 100% confident on what that hiring manager is looking for.
We're all guilty of making assumptions.
Yes, and my dad taught me at a very early age what assuming means, so I don't really assume much.
Well, thank you for joining us. This has been a total pleasure. Thank you for all your help and insight into this topic that I'm hoping people are interested to listen to.
Thank you for your partnership.
Of course.
Thanks for listening to Soapbox. If you've got thoughts or questions about today's episode, reach out to us via our website, spencer-ogden.com. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and follow Spencer Ogden on LinkedIn for updates, insights, and behind-the-scenes content. Founded in 2010, Spencer Ogden is a global recruitment leader in sustainability, natural resources, and infrastructure. With 12 offices worldwide and over 380 specialists, we connect top talent across the full energy value chain, from finance to design to operations. Powered by our purpose of creating careers to power a sustainable future, we've spent 15 years building deep partnerships with clients and candidates to help drive the energy transition forward. We'll see you next time on Soapbox.